Welcome, and thank you very much for coming to our Road Home training session. As many of you may realize, this is focused on people who are experiencing homelessness and how to get them to move or help them to move as fast as possible from shelter or being unsheltered into permanent housing. However, a lot of the topics that we have also cross boundaries into other disciplines. And while your job may not focus directly on people experiencing homelessness, you may encounter them. So we welcome people who are not specifically in the homeless service field. So we really appreciate it. We have a couple more people that are expected, so you may see more people come in. If you have not signed the consent form, we ask if you could please do so. We are very pleased to have someone videotape, and he's in the back. But if for some reason you are not comfortable with that, let us know, but we do appreciate if you could sign the consent form. I think that's about all. Our presenter this morning, we're very pleased to have Christine Fowlani. She is with the Domestic Violence Services Legal Clinic, and that is through CAP, right, Community Action Program. And she's going to tell us about the legal remedies, not just from PFAs, although that will be part of it. So unless there are any other questions, and real quick before I forget, the bathroom is back there. The place to hang your coats is back there if you like it. There is some coffee and juice in the back. We will have lunch here, so please stay for lunch. The food's pretty good here, so help yourself. And if you have questions, I guess, Christine, you're okay. People just raise their hand, or what do you want them to do?
I don't. Is this on? Is this on? I don't know that I would need this, but I am appreciative of the fact that sometimes people have a little bit trouble hearing, and so I will try to use it. It doesn't sound to me like it's amplifying that much. So, with regard to questions, there's a lot of stuff to cover in the hour and a half, and so what I've done is I've set times in between so that we can stop and we can address everybody's questions. But I can also tell you that there's 3x5 cards on your tables with lines on them. So when you have those questions, write them down, because I don't know about you. I move on to the next thing in my head, and then I forget, and then I go home and go, I really wanted to know this, and now I don't know. The other thing to know is, in my crazy life, I did not stop and get business cards this morning, but if you look on the back of the brochures, the purple brochures on your table, there is the number for the legal clinic, and that's where you can reach me. Does it work now? Yeah? Okay. Okay. We good? Good? Okay. So I am going to cheat a little bit because I never would get the opportunity to see all of you to talk about some of just the basics of domestic violence. We're not going to go over too many. I'm pretty sure that everyone in the room has some minimal understanding of the dynamics of domestic violence. But I do want to talk about some of the specifics because all I do is work with victims. And so our experiences and things I think can be helpful to people who generally, I think probably everyone in this room is dealing with victims some of the time. Not all of your clients are victims of domestic violence. So we're too big to do introductions, but can everybody give me a show of hands? How many people are dealing with victims of domestic violence more than 50% of the time? Okay, 25% of the time. So if you're less than 25% of the time, what was your motivation for coming today? Anybody?
No judgment zone, don't worry.
Go ahead.
I'm from the YWCA, we run a shelter, so
Okay.
I can't tell you the percentage, and sorry. I'm from the YWCA, we run a shelter, so the chances of someone coming in with DD is pretty high, so that's a good thing.
Okay. Anybody have any ideas about the numbers of women who have reported that they've experienced domestic violence who are homeless as well? 70 to 80%. So if you're dealing with homeless women, you're dealing with victims of domestic violence. The thing that I notice a lot in my practice is people come to me because I work at the clinic and they anticipate telling me about their domestic violence. If they come to you for healthcare, that's not what they're going to start with, because they're there because they have a headache, or they're there because they have a hurt shoulder, or they're there because their blood pressure's high. And so again, people self-identify because of where they are often, and so I think it's important to remember that and ask the right questions, because we all know wherever you're working, this is an area that's important. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do an overview of domestic violence. Like I said, I anticipate most people having some sense of what domestic violence is. We're going to look at something that I like to call how the legal system defines domestic violence, because I think that there's a lot of confusion among people who do not work in the legal system about why things do not get the remedies that we think they should. PFAs, criminal charges, no contact with kids. A lot of times my experience is that people don't quite understand why that happens. Third thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about abusers, what abusers look like. I think that this is a topic right now because of what's going on in the White House. There's been a lot of discussion about how if you don't look like an abuser, which I'm not sure what that is, but that you're given a kind of the benefit of the doubt. And then one of the topics that I always like to discuss when I'm covering this is the question, and what I think lies in a lot of the back of our minds when we're working with victims is, why don't they just leave? And what the dynamics of that are. Then I would be remiss to not talk about trauma, and so we'll touch on trauma a little bit, about physical and mental, and then if we have time, we'll talk about how it impacts us and secondary trauma. The third thing is then we'll get to the fact that I'm an attorney and you all have questions about PFAs. And we'll talk about custody and support and things like that. So I'm not going to not live up to what you came for, but I'm going to cheat and have a little bit of stuff come in first, okay? Okay, so what is domestic violence? A pattern of coercive behavior used by one person to gain and maintain power and control over another in an intimate or former intimate partnership. So just for a second, think about that. The example I like to use is, we always hear the story, it's the common, urban, he hit me because I didn't have dinner on the table. I've heard that story, that's actually real, that's happened. It's not about the dinner, it's about you didn't listen to me. Batterers are about setting up rules. If you don't follow the rules, there's consequences. Oftentimes the consequences escalate to physical violence, but a lot of domestic violence is not physical. It's throwing things, it's the look, it's ignoring, it's walking out of the house and not telling you where you're going. It's having affairs with other women because you're not good enough. There's lots of parts of domestic violence that are not physical. And I think that that is also important when we talk about how somebody might not present as a victim of domestic violence, because a lot of people think if I've never had a black eye, I've never had a broken bone, I've never been kicked and bruised, I'm not really a victim of domestic violence. But the impact on people's physical and mental health is exactly the same if you've been to a minute. How many people have heard the term gaslighting? Okay, so gaslighting is, there's an old movie. What'd you say? Yes, from the 40s. It's called gaslighting, okay? And what it is basically you say something and your abuser says, that's not true. That's not what happened. My mom didn't say that to you. You're imagining that. And so you go to bed that night and you're like, wow, I thought she said that to me. I thought she was really angry with me. I thought she was really sticking up for him. Wow. Huh, maybe not. Next day you wake up, you go downstairs, creamer's gone. No creamer. Wait a second. I know yesterday I got creamer. Where'd the creamer go? Where's the creamer, honey? I don't know what you're talking about. You never get creamer. You always forget to get the creamer when you go to the grocery store. And so it's things like that where you just start to question your sanity, basically. And it's intentional. It's not about forgetting. It's not about, I don't really remember or anything else. It's intentional. And so I think that I just saw that there was a webinar about it. It's really important to remember how psychologically damaging that is to somebody because you start to think you're crazy. So how many people have seen this? Power control wheel? I think that for me, this is a great tool if someone's starting to self-identify and starting to see that some of the behaviors in their relationship are not right. It's very simple. It's very easy to start breaking down the different areas so that someone can see how what they're feeling and what's going on can be really, really psychologically challenging. And I think most of us also know that on there, nothing on there is about physical violence. And in my experience, physical violence really is not the common. That happens less often. It's also interesting too because our criminal justice system as well as a lot of our social service systems are based on physical violence and what the response to physical violence is. And so it's very important because a lot of times you can't get the response to the other stuff. Okay, what types of behaviors make up abuse? Physical, emotional, psychological, economic abuse. So this is I have no idea how much money is in our checking account. I have no idea how much money he makes. I have no idea what we normally spend on gas. I have no idea what we spend on the electric bill. I don't know if we paid for the furniture or whether it's over a period of time. So this is the kind of stuff that when someone starts to maybe come into your agency to get services and they have to qualify for services, we often have women that will tell us, I have no idea. Well, can you get that information? No. It's not even an option. It's not even, if I ask, I'll get it, or passwords are all protected, accounts are all separate and apart. People have been known to have P.O. boxes where nothing goes to the house, or goes to his mom's house, or where he lived before. And so it's really important to understand it's economic abuse often, not a lack of knowledge or not a lack of wanting to do it. It's just they can't get it to us. Religious. Just the other day, we have a new attorney in our office and we were talking about someone, she will not file for divorce. Will not file for divorce. So that means that she's jeopardizing support. It means that she's jeopardizing him disposing of income and assets, changing titles to cars, all kinds of things. Because unless you have some mechanism to go into court by filing a divorce, I can't stop any of it. So that's one of the things that we see a lot of. Obviously, there's also a lot of religions and a lot of religious leaders that believe that you should stay no matter what. This is something you're committed to. And there's a lot of clients that think that too. And so I don't think it's just always an external force. Immigration status. We have lots of women that come to us and say, I have absolutely no idea what the status of my papers are, where my papers are, what we've done, what we've not done. We've also had clients whose abusers have called immigration and told them stories, made up things about them, called them and said she just married me because she wanted to get into the country. And they're not like a confidential, they're just an agency taking information. And so again, there's also sometimes where the abuser, because they're here based on his status, he has to also participate in it to keep the status going. And so that is also a huge problem because then you're stuck. And oftentimes too, coming here but you didn't get married, you came here kind of the promise or just, was a good idea, you were kind of attached to this person, and then maybe you had children or not had children, and there really is no way to change your status now that you're here, because you came in undocumented, and there really is nothing we can do at this point. So I think immigration status is also elevated in its level of ability of an abuser to use it because of the current political climate. Everybody, you can say to anyone, I'm going to get you deported. Nobody knows if that's true or not, and I think that it's an important aspect. Mental health. You're crazy. Everybody knows you're crazy. You've had depression for years. It has nothing to do with me. It's you. You're the one that's aggressive towards me, so I have to keep you in line. If anyone knew how crazy you were and I exposed what you were like behind closed doors, everyone would understand what I do. Taking medication, not taking medication. We've had a lot of my clients that will tell me he wouldn't let me take my meds, or he told me I had to stay on my meds. So mental health status. Drug and alcohol. If you're using, he's going to use that. You call the cops, I'm going to show him where all your stuff is. You try to leave in the car, I'm going to call the cops because you don't have a driver's license. You were drunk. That's what happened. Don't you remember? That's why I hit you, because I had to restrain you while you were drunk. And so I think drug and alcohol. Okay, so basically what this talks about, and I wanted you to be able to listen to somebody else for a couple minutes. Okay, so this gentleman's name is Evan Stark. He is a professor and has done a lot of work on domestic violence in the legal system, as well as been an expert witness in homicide cases and things like that. And so what he talks about is what I started to talk about earlier. So a physical incident of domestic violence happens and the police are called. What doesn't get considered is what led up to that and what happens afterwards. So oftentimes you'll be in a situation, a client will come in and explain to you that the police were called, he was arrested, he was charged with harassment, he was charged with assault, more times than not harassment. He got out and he came home and it really did me no good. What was the point? So what no one knows about is the other almost like terroristic things that have happened, keeping you up. So wandering around the house late at night, making sure that you're not sleeping, or telling you can't come to the bedroom so that you end up sleeping on the couch, which then you get disturbed every time they come downstairs, or they want to watch TV all night. Other incidents that he talks about are things where, kind of the things we were talking about before, the gaslighting stuff, using other people I was using the example of keeping stuff at his mom's house, or sometimes it's a girlfriend, and so there's always this out for the abuser, and so you always are worried that the person's going to leave, or the person's going to leave and go stay there for a couple of days and you won't know about money, you won't know whether the car's coming back, you won't know whether the kids are going to get picked up from school. And so one of the things that the legal system, particularly protection orders and the criminal justice system, is they don't look at context. And so a lot of times what you need to is really have your client tell you the story from the beginning. Because what they may not even identify, and you may not identify, is the incident was only part of what happened. I think it's also really important because if we're trying to help someone find housing, a lot of times we're trying to help them find housing maybe after they've left. And then all of a sudden they're saying, well, I can't do this because then this will make him mad. Or I need to be able to do this. I have to have an extra bedroom because he does come and go. Well, then I need his income information. Well, I can't give you his income information because I don't get his income information. Well, then he can't live there. And so you run into this contextual abuse that actually is about dealing with clients who are still in contact with their abusers. And so a lot of our services are about separation. And that's probably not reality for a lot of our clients. The other piece to this is a lot of our clients have children with them. And so you're going to have contact because of those kids, which then has an opportunity for someone to re-engage. And that's what it's about, establishing control, re-engaging in the relationship, basically. And so I think that that's important to remember, that a lot of what we want to be solved is not solved because it's incident-based and not contextual. So does that make sense? It's time-consuming, but I think it's important to figure out how to help people. You got to know the whole story. You can't just know that, I got hit, because that's what somebody might present with, but knowing the context is really important. Okay, so what might an abuser look like? As I said, this, I think, is currently the topic of conversation. Abusers look like abusers. I think the other part, the flip side of this is women being believed and listening and recognizing that, we deal with only victims primarily. We deal with abusers when we go to court. A lot of times in your circumstances, you're going to be dealing with families. And so when you see someone, you hear a story, a woman's telling you a story about what happened last night or what happened last week, you're also working with the person who she's alleging is this perpetrator. And so trying to figure out how do you safely listen and believe, even though that's not the person you see. The person you see is very compliant. The person you see is the one that gives you all the documents you need. They're the person that seems to be completely vested in the family doing well. They're very compliant with you. And so I think that the biggest thing that this most recent stuff that came out of the White House is domestic violence is not about anger. It's not about exploding because somebody didn't do the right thing. It's about control, and it's very specific and intentional. So we often hear the story, well, he isn't like that at work. He isn't like that with his children. He isn't like that with the rest of the world. Well, of course not. He's not trying to control them. He also may be in a situation where that kind of behavior and trying to control other people or be a leader is accepted. So if you're someone who's out there in the world and you're a part of a company and you're trying, you have underlings and you tell them what to do and they do it, then that's success. But when you go home and there's a personal relationship where you may have to have equity and there may have to be an exchange of information and there may have to be fairness and, other people get to decide something, that's where it comes out because it's about regaining that control. And so I think that for me, that's one of the things that's most difficult in the dialogue that we're having right now is that it's not about being out of control. It's exactly the opposite. It's very intentional. And there should be no one that's surprised that that person isn't the way they are other places when they're at home. I mean, that's the whole point. Okay, so here's the other discussion that we have a lot is why don't they just leave? So give me some ideas. Scared? Kids? Okay. What'd you say? Okay. Okay. Language. Don't have enough language to go out and kind of navigate. They need somebody to do that for them. They love them. Yes. Users are abusers all the time. I think that sometimes that's what happens when women decide to leave. It becomes more frequent than not. But, and one of the things I say to my clients all the time is I never loved him and never had kids with him. So for me to make decisions, it's very different. I know that this was not the way it was all the time. And it's not all bad. So one of the things that I like to do is reframe this question when you're having these discussions and when you're working with clients. Lots of victims do leave. And so figuring out what makes people stay for certain periods of time. There are certain periods of time they get hit once and they're done. So they say that they've been in an abusive relationship 3 months, 6 months. Then you'll talk to someone who's been in an abusive relationship for 26 years. And so trying to figure out what was the reason that one person's 3 months, one person's 12 months, one person's 27 years. Because each person has their breaking point. We had a client once who came in and she said he got pissed off that the Thanksgiving turkey wasn't cooked right. And all of us in the office were like, okay, like, I think that's probably happened in my marriage too. And it was because of all the things that had happened before. And this was the last time she was going to be disrespected. And this is the last time she was going to listen to him complain about something that she spent all day doing. And once we got past, there were years of horrible things going on. I just had a client the other day, he wouldn't let her keep her clothes in the house. She had to keep her clothes in the barn. Like, again, just stuff that just takes away your basic sense of security, your basic sense of being, and importance. The other question I like to sometimes change it to, because I always, and still am, 20 years later, shocked that anyone ever does leave. Because when you see the efforts that an abuser will go to get somebody back, it's amazing that anyone ever does leave. The important thing to know too is that there is a reality that women are at an increased risk for violence and homicide when they leave. And so, as you can imagine, leaving is the ultimate expression of trying to get away from the control. And so abusers will do anything at that point to regain that control. So it's not your client's overactive imagination. They will up the ante, and it is the most dangerous time. Other thing is to helping people just try to figure out what that finances mean. When we were saying that finances are sometimes, so how does that look? Is that a separate bank account? Is that separate information kept, duplicates, things so that you have the information you need, particularly for a lot of us, to get the services you need. Because there are services out there when you're low income and you have children and you need to find a way to support yourself separately and apart. I have several clients right now, their abusers haven't filed tax returns in years. And so they have absolutely no way to verify income. They have no way to show what they made on their own, no access to their W-2s. And so again, starting to gather that information so that they even have the ability to access social services that might be available is really important. The other thing is too, when do people leave? Everybody's had clients all over, like I said, all over the continuum. There are people that one time, there are people that have endured things that I can't even imagine. And so asking more questions about when do people successfully leave is important. And then how does the program that you work for support leaving? Do you ask for information? When someone says to you, I can't get that information because that'll set him off, do you still require it? Are there times where you're making phone calls to a home where someone's trying to leave and you're leaving messages and saying, this is so-and-so, I'm trying to get a hold of, Sally, please have her call me back. You really need to change how you think about things. And if you have either a suspicion or someone has indicated to you that they're in a domestic violence situation, then what do you do as an agency in your work to start treating that person independently? We have a lot of this, and that's what I was saying, with refugees. Refugees are resettled as a family. And so we often have difficulty once women decide that they want to leave and they're not willing to endure the abuse that's been going on, getting services separate and apart. And so it's really, really been a challenge for us as well. Okay, this is something that I find extremely helpful. How many people here find it difficult to work with women who are victims of domestic violence? Yes? No? Okay, I find it hard. And so I do police training. And so one of the things that I started trying to explain to police officers, and it played out perfectly one day. So I was talking about eating bacon. You know, people tell you, well, you really shouldn't eat bacon, it's bad for you, but you still eat bacon. Of course, they were cops, so donuts. You know, you're 20 pounds overweight, you shouldn't eat donuts. And then one time I had 2 or 3 guys in the back that were chewing tobacco and dipping, spitting in the bottle. And I said, how many of you have had mothers, sisters, wives send you the pictures of what that looks like when you get mouth cancer, when you get throat cancer? And here you are, still dipping. And we want everybody, they get hit, they get yelled at, they call the cops, and they're supposed to be out the door. Domestic violence is just like everything else. It's just a different degree. Every day we have behaviors that we wish we could change and we don't. And so this is stages of change is basically drug and alcohol. But for me, it helps. I often think about the examples of, there's a list of things this morning I got up and said, I should probably not be doing this. And I think if you put it in the context of, you're going to meet with clients in all different stages. And you're going to meet with clients who have exited those stages and they went back. And when they go back, doesn't mean that they go all the way back to, I'm never leaving, I'm not going to do this, I'm never going back to him. They went back, and they may still be thinking about leaving. And that's why the question of why and when do people leave is so important, because what happened? So what happened to make people exit? So they, pre-contemplation, might come to see us when that happens, right? We have a lot of people that come in to talk about protection orders or talk about what their options are, to kind of see and get information. So at that point, I don't know, usually within 15 to 20 minutes I can tell. They're just getting information, and they probably tell you that like 20 times. I'm just here to get information, I'm just here to get information. And then we have people that start calling back. Might even make an appointment, miss it. Might make an appointment, miss it. And then we have people that come in and you can tell in the same amount of time, 5 to 10 minutes, I'm here, I'm going to file, and I'm done. This is not happening again. I'm not going to let this happen again. I'm done. They take the action. They go. They file the PFA. They go to the 3 o'clock hearing. They get the order. Don't see the abuser. See the judge. Convince the judge. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Have to wait for a 10-day hearing. Don't show up. So again, this is how it works. And this is what we need to keep in our heads. This is exactly how it works for me not eating bacon, or running, or exercising, or getting up early in the morning, or, you know, this is exactly what we all do. This is no different. It's the exact same thing. How many times, too, does your doctor look at you and be, your blood pressure's high because you keep eating salt? That's what you need to do. You need to change your diet. You go away. 3 to 5 days, you're good. You're calculating everything. You're great. You can feel it. You can tell. You're just a little less puffy. And sure enough, you show up one night. It's late after work. You pop the lasagna from Stouffer's in the microwave, and all hell is, it's just done. The consequences for having high blood pressure could technically probably be just as bad. depending on your history and depending on where you are. And so I like to have this framework because it is hard to work with women who are in domestic violence situations. It is hard. We're not there, and like I said, I never loved him and I don't have kids with him. So I don't have that connection. For me to sit there and say, this is what we're gonna do, this is what we're gonna file, and this is how we're gonna go about it is super easy. Super easy. For you to sit there and say, give me this information, we're going to do this, we're going to find out, we're going to get this done. You know, you slept last night, presumably. You probably were safe. You probably didn't have to worry that when you got up this morning, the other person in your house wasn't going to take the kids to school so that you then had to scramble to figure out what to do. All those things are happening while this is going on. And so anyone that has a drug and alcohol background, we know that that's what happens, right? Life happens. It's not as simple as, I'm going to pack up my bags and I'm going to go. And for all of us that work with victims 75, 50, once every 6 months, this is the hard stuff. This is where you start to say, I don't get it, I can't do this. One of the things that I find most rewarding in the work that I do is when someone has gone back to their abuser and then they come back to us when they decide to leave again. That to me says that we're doing something right. Because again, there's the stigma that you can only get services and you can only get help if you leave. But we're still there when you go back again. You have to figure that out. And so again, I think for me, this is a great way to keep yourself going. Okay, we're going to take a break for questions. Anything about DV 101, DV dynamics, anything anybody wants to say that they're been holding their breath and tell me how wrong I am. Oh, I thought you're raising a hand for her.
Do you think that courts will ever begin using behavioral specialists? Many of the reasons why people experiencing domestic violence don't leave is because of children. So if I've got children to my abuser and how to make the choice of allowing the visitation to the children, he has demonstrated towards me that he has the capacity to be oftentimes physically abusive. So if a behavioral specialist can say, like we allow expert testimony in any other court of law, why do we not use expert testimony in these what appear to be minor court hearings? And I think once we begin to change systemically things like that, we will begin to see the power be placed back to the victims, survivors. But until that mind frame changes, it's his word versus mine. They have a right to visitation. Like, at what point does the court wake up and say, this person has the capacity to be abusive towards the mom? You know, I think that's a huge part of the problem.
Okay, so what I do at the clinic is I do protection and representation, but I primarily do custody and support divorce. So my major part of my practice is custody. She's 100% accurate that the court system prioritizes contact over safety often. They also have a mindset that once the parties are no longer together, the violence is no longer relevant. Separated means you're not, because again, you just got angry at her, you just wanted to control her. They never look at the fact that part of controlling her and the mother of the children is through visitation and contact and having to know the doctor's appointments and having to know all of those things that the courts routinely give abusive men rights to. I would put it back to you and anyone else in here who's a behavioral health person. I can't find someone to testify.
Like, for example, my grandmother is into behavior.
Right.
So
I know expert witnesses. I used to be an adult probation officer, so after 2 years of service, I could stand as an expert witness. So
It's not about qualifying you. The rules in Pennsylvania are very, very, very lax. But I can I have 3 cases right now where kids are in counseling for significant consequences of the abuse that they've witnessed, and all of those counselors refuse to come to court.
Oh, maybe not a counselor, maybe a behavioral specialist.
I would go with a child development person. You know what I mean? Like I would gladly have someone who doesn't know the kids, doesn't know anything about them, to explain the stages of development and how this impacts kids. You know what I mean? Like, just basic. I agree with you.
Do it?
What?
Will you do it?
Will I do it? If someone gives me someone that would do it, yeah. I mean, I think you have to remember family law is a very odd, non-procedure, like it's just a wild, wild west, as my criminal law friends call it. And so we can certainly talk about that too more when we get to the custody, but I think your observations are correct. And I think it may be something that you see. One of the things that I often encounter when I work with people and try to talk to people that are not doing this all the time is you see results that don't make any sense to you, right? So she comes in and she says he has every other weekend and Wednesday, and you're like, what? He was charged with strangulation. He busted down your door. I saw the black eye. And so you start to do this, well, she must not be telling me the truth, that can't be true. It's true. I was just having the discussion in the back about this whole Mark Cuban thing. So his guy, who works for him, breaks his girlfriend's wrist and gets probation and his record clean after he pays his fine. How are we supposed to then be holding people accountable if that's the result you're going to get? So I'm going to tell you, when you hear stuff's weird, it probably was. Not all the time, but it probably was, because you're absolutely positively right. The courts prioritize and the law prioritizes contact between both parents. And that goes really, really, really far. You have to have pretty significant injuries. And I get more out of drug and alcohol. Someone with 3 DUIs, I get more response from the court and more evaluations than I do. It's just domestic violence. They're not together anymore. I'm sure it won't happen. Anybody else? So does this stuff resonate with you? I'm totally crazy. These issues you're struggling with when you work with clients?
No judgment zone here.
Yeah, like, I'm good. I admitted it. Women are hard to work with. I get it.
What's the percentage with female and male? I mean, males are abused as well.
Males are abused too. Primarily, any stat is different. Most of the stuff I see is 70 to 80% is male abuse against female abuse. I primarily started my work as violence against women. And so I understand that there are dynamics where men are in heterosexual relationships that are being abused. My experience has not been that. My experience has been where men have been in situations, one of the situations where it was pretty significant, she was addicted to major drugs. It was, she'd get high and go ballistic. She wasn't trying to control him. She just didn't have her wherewithal, and he was trying to intervene when she was losing her mind and seeing things crawl on the wall. And so again, that was drug and alcohol. I think that we see, the power and control aspect. Most women are not supported in that anywhere else, even if they're abusing their partner at home. Nowhere else in the world will they feel that power. It's just not what happens in our culture. And so while it may be that the person is controlling someone internally, it's not frequent that you really see the power and control aspect of it. There's violence in people's homes between people who are married and people who are sleeping together and people who have children together. That's not my definition of domestic violence. When people hit each other because they're angry and hit each other because they're in a combat, that's different. When I hit you because I want you to behave, and I want you to do what I asked you to do, and you didn't do it, that's domestic violence. We have a lot of violence in people's homes. That's another whole issue. But what we're talking about is it's used to control someone. And I think that that's important because when you talk about domestic violence, if you start mixing in some other stuff, your remedies and what you're looking for relief for don't fit. They don't fit. And I think that that's part of what's wrong with the criminal justice system in the response to domestic violence. A lot of the stuff that they're trying to criminalize is actually just violence. It's people pulling guns on each other in the kitchen, people pulling knives on each other in the kitchen. That's not necessarily about control. That's about I'm angry, I'm pissed off, I'm high, I'm drunk. That's different. And we need to be clear. Not to say that they're both not lethal, but they're different. And the remedies to get out of them are different. Yes?
We're from St. Joseph Children's Hospital.
Yes.
Occasionally we will be working with a family who we're referring, our clinicians have referred them out for other behavioral health, the kids for behavioral health services. And some services require, consent from both parents. We have run into, maybe mom and dad are separated or they are divorced, but like we talked about, they still have shared custody. And, one case that I was working with, mom was like, they can try, but he's going to say no because of the manipulation. Like, he's going to put that on me, that this is my fault, that our child needs services or whatever. We've had other ones where they're like, I just know because I don't even want anyone contacting him.
Right.
So, any words of wisdom for us as case managers?
I can tell you the court is very receptive to that. If you have access, if they have a custody order and they have access to an attorney, both big ifs, the courts are extremely receptive to children getting behavioral health. And so they will not allow someone, either parent, to put a barrier up to that. They may say, we need to agree on somebody, or I'm gonna tell you who, or, you know what I mean? But I can tell you that the courts want children to get help when they need it. And I would argue that the courts probably think everyone that's going through this needs behavioral health. You know what I mean? Because they think that that's what would help a lot of the kind of dissolve some of the issues and the consequences long term. The problem is not everybody has money to hire an attorney. Not everybody wants to hire an attorney because when you go into court and you're opening a can of worms. We always tell everybody he's going to get every other weekend and Wednesday, minimum. So the consequences of opening that up. My thing back to behavioral health people is I don't know why some people do it and some people don't. Like I have providers that don't require it, and then I have providers that do require it. And so it's kind of interesting to me, and I'm assuming it's your risk management people that make a decision about whether they want to do it one way or they want to do it the other way. And so it's always curious to me why they go one way and why they don't. I have other providers that are like, yeah, I don't need his consent. And so that's kind of out there in your world to figure out and maybe be the advocate to that risk management person to say, here's the consequences of this. Here's the long-term consequences if they have to go to court. It's going to get worse. We also know, and this is primarily from work that's done in sexual assault incest in homes. Do you want your kid going to behavioral health if you're abusing them? No. I mean, so that is the other reason that the courts traditionally say, no, let's go talk about this, and then we'll go from there, because there really isn't, people don't usually see a reason why not. I think that there's oftentimes disagreements about opinions, there's disagreements about medication. Those are real arguments to be had and discussed, but again, I think there's also ways around it. People do family therapy, you know what I mean? And then if they won't participate, then you move on. You know what I mean? And then, but I think it's finding alternatives because going to court is not always easy or accessible to people. Yeah.
Just one last question. How does your organization handle, I know a popular tactic of abusers is cross-filing.
Yeah.
So what they'll do is they'll actually come to your organization, you'll put them in, reaching out for PFAs, and then begin with the abusers. So is there any sort of protocol set up with your organization to negate that violence? Like you can't stop the violence from the abuser.
Right. We represent defendants. If you have a history of domestic violence, as we speak this morning, this is happening in our office. So it's interesting that you should bring that up. Our agency, if you're a victim of domestic violence, will represent you. Okay, so normally that manifests itself. The first step is that you file the protection order. But we're also very aware that oftentimes a protection order can be filed against you. So if we have someone that we've worked with that calls us and says, I identify as a victim, this is what he did, what should I do? Oftentimes people don't want to go file a PFA. That wasn't the remedy that they wanted. But now that the person has filed it against them, we recommend that you go file because, again, the incidents probably rose to the level. It just didn't, you weren't forced to go to the courthouse. So we represent people regardless of whether they're a defendant or a plaintiff in a protection order if you're a victim. That's our identifying characteristic. This morning we have one, he filed a petition on behalf of the kid. And so she's a defendant in that action. But again, a longtime client of ours who we know this has been the abuser for a very long time. So we were meeting with her this morning because, again, I think she didn't want to get the court involved. Like, she just wanted to, like, something bad happened, we're all going to go on our way, you know. And so we were meeting with her this morning to decide, is it a defense or is there something really that you are fearful of him and you need to have protection? So yeah, our agency identifies who the victim is. We don't kind of a blanket. Yes. Doesn't everybody love Healthy Beginnings? Does everybody know what Healthy Beginnings is? Healthy Beginnings is the greatest program in the whole entire world.
So I just wondered your experience, and I know statistically reasons during pregnancy, and I've seen both ways of women who have decided to stay
People can't hear the questions.
because they're pregnant and they have children with their abuser. But also, I think I've seen a little bit more leaving because they're pregnant. And I just wondered what you see in your work, if that correlates or.
I think it's kind of what you're saying. It's a spectrum, right? And so I think that there's a cultural still stigma of going to the hospital and having a baby without someone being there as the father. We have people who have PFAs against the father and want to make exceptions so that they can be in the room during the delivery. And then we have people who, that statistic that violence escalates during pregnancy is pretty common knowledge. I think it's, you know what I mean? Like, and so I think women get scared and they think, oh, now it's going to get really bad. You have to remember too about the control and the narcissism, which is, I think, what happens in the pregnancy and baby stage. So all of a sudden you're pregnant and you can't do the things that he's demanding of you, or your health is not as great, or energy level is not as great. And so then he starts to already see the diminished attention, the diminished, ability to follow my rules, and so I think it depends if you're seeing that escalate right away. I've heard some of the worst stories when children have been very, very small. You know what I mean? Like, women have received significant abuse. And I think sometimes abusers don't abuse women when they're pregnant because they're scared that they're going to hurt them, like, significantly. And then when they're no longer pregnant, it's almost like it's pent up. And so again, I think pregnancy and domestic violence are like, scary, risky times. I think women also don't want kids to come into the world like that. Like, they know it's bad, and so now they're thinking, oh God, that somebody else is coming into the world and they're going to have to experience as bad. And what do I do about that? But I'm also extremely vulnerable. So it's really hard. Make your brains on trauma when you're done.
Sure.
Okay.
It's kind of in line with what you were saying about birthing and like domestic violence happened during that time. Speaking to a friend last night who's now a midwife and a doula, and she said that when she was a nurse, like, she had actually been experiencing domestic violence herself. And so I realized that I think there's, like, I want to say 3 times women in those fields are experiencing domestic violence as well. And she was saying that helped her to be able to become a midwife and become a doula and to be able to support women in her own way, because even at her, as a nurse in her job, you know, some of the doctors were like, oh, well, you know, you've been with him 26 years, honey, you don't need to leave him, you know, it's fine, and, you know, she ended up losing her baby anyway. So I feel like us as professionals, like, we need to be taking care of ourselves as well within our own homes, to be acknowledging those types of things, to be able to help other people. So that's just a thought I had from last night's conversation.
Yes, and I appreciate you saying that, and I think by my also saying that it's hard working with women who are victims of domestic violence, you have to recognize that that means you have to do something for yourself, because what you're trying to do is hard. It will also, it changes everything, right? Like, so now you see something on the television and you're like, oh, maybe that's that. Or you work with a client who you just see all the signs and they're not even, it's not even on their radar. And I think it's really important to help, what do you do about that? You know what I mean? Like, how do you be okay with that? Walking away, knowing that that person's at risk, or that that person, you know, statistically that this is going to increase. I think that that's hard. I think, you know, this is pretty much about women's health. I think that there's also a lot of people that do a lot of work in terms of what domestic violence does long-term health-wise. We're seeing that. We're gonna, and this is gonna segue right into trauma. Okay, so this is another thing that really helps me when I'm trying to do work and it's getting hard. This is the definition of trauma. I think the important thing for me is threat to life, bodily integrity, or insanity, and the individual's coping capacity and ability is overwhelmed. There's some concept in law school, it's called the eggshell rule, and it's about if you hit someone in a car and they already had a broken neck, you're out of luck. You still hit them in the car, and all the damages that come out of them already having a broken neck are your responsibility too. So for me, in my weird little way that I think about things, that's trauma. It doesn't matter that what the person has experienced wouldn't bother you. Has no impact. It only has an impact that it bothered them. And so what you may think of as a slight or get over it, it doesn't matter. It's their impact. And so for me, that's what's really important to remember. It's their trauma, it's their experience. So the physical signs of trauma and having experienced trauma, pretty much probably everybody knows these. Mental. One of the ones that I think the edginess and agitation, or startle. I notice a lot when I walk up to clients in the waiting room, or we have an automatic stapler in our office. And so every time that thing, I jump. And so again, I think you need to remember that that's sometimes what we're seeing in clients when they just can't sit still, they can't concentrate. This is about what has happened to their brain. So I'm not going to go into this, but again, this to me and this stuff helps me put logic to what's happening in front of me. And so there are physiological changes to people's brains when they've experienced trauma. And again, it's trauma to them, not trauma to us. And I'm sure lots of you have been reading and going to things about trauma-informed responses. And if I was not of the age that I am, that I don't want to get any more tattoos, I would get this tattooed across my forehead. Because this is truly what you need to say to yourself. And it's hard. It is not easy. People present as challenging. We have jobs to get done. We have things that we need to accomplish. And we need to help people. This takes time. And I don't know about you, but I have yet to have one client who has one trauma. And so I think recognizing that, in the domestic violence world, I get the domestic violence traumas. So they tell me all those things that have happened to them. But I can't tell you, and again, you talk about percentages, somebody's doing this research, but I can't tell you the number of people who sit in my office who are there about domestic violence, who disclose child sex abuse, who disclose child physical abuse, who disclose abuse from another person. This is not the first abusive relationship. All of our services are free, so we deal with mostly low to low income women, so they have the trauma of living in poverty. Health issues. I mean, I don't know how many of you have opened up your file and looked at somebody's birth date and been like, I mean, we have people who have physically lived hard lives with lots of traumas. So this question does not necessarily mean that you have to sit down with someone and talk about their 20-year history. That's not what that means. It just means that in the back of your head, every time you're having a conversation, it's about what is that history? What's living behind what I'm seeing? And how do I respond to that? And I am not sitting here telling you it's easy or that I'm good at it every day. But I think it's really important that once you change your frame of mind around this, it really does help getting through and getting people to where they want to be. Okay, so guess what we're going to talk about now? Protection orders! As you may have guessed, the other stuff is more fun to me. I've been an attorney for 20 years. I started out at legal services. Then I went and did some policy work around legal systems, criminal, civil, all kinds of stuff. Then came back to Lancaster and have been doing direct representation since. And so I've probably represented thousands of clients. And I only say that not because that's amazing or whatever, but I've pretty much seen it all. It's kind of like they fall into certain categories and it's all the same and whatever. So, okay, how many people know what a protection order is? How many people have clients with protection orders? How many people have clients who with protection orders that they dropped? How many people have protection orders that they have in place but they still contact their abuser? Okay, so we're all on the same page. A protection from abuse order is the occurrence of one or more of the following acts between family and household members, sexual or intimate partners, or persons who share biological parenthood. So it's a broad category, but it's not your neighbor. So that's how we generally think of it in your head. Because in our world, because we do this work, everybody, I'm going to get a PFA against you, and I'm like, no, you're not. Okay, so in Pennsylvania, attempt to cause or intentionally, knowingly, recklessly causing bodily injury, serious bodily injury, rape, involuntary, deviant sexual intercourse, sexual assault, statutory sexual assault, aggravated indecent assault, and indecent assault with a deadly weapon. In Lancaster County, you have to pretty much be injured or threatened very close and very realistically to being significantly injured. So one of the things we talked about is context. One of the things we talked about is incidents that don't rise to the level of like a criminal charge or things like that. Protection orders. The standard of proof is not as high as a criminal case. Criminal cases beyond a reasonable doubt, just like TV. And so sometimes if you don't have a charge, but there were injuries or there was something else, and we're going to do testimony of the victim and the testimony of the defendant, you kind of got a protection order, whereas in a criminal case you might not. And so you will see that sometimes. But in Lancaster County, it's got to be pretty significant. With that being said, in Lancaster County, probably 40 to 50% of protection orders are by agreement, final orders. And so again, someone comes into court, attorneys talk, or an attorney for the plaintiff would talk to the defendant, and basically there's some recognition that they need to stay away from each other, and so the defendant will agree. There's also another quirky thing in Lancaster County. There are lots of what we in our world call long-term continuances. So you're going to run into some clients that have temporary protection orders, and then they have a hearing in 3 months, 6 months, even sometimes a year. If there are no violations of that order, then the order will go away. Reasonable fear, it's all that again, it's got to be pretty significant. False imprisonment, we do see some. And then physical or sexual abuse of minor children. This also, though, if you don't have an indicator report from children and youth, probably not happening. This one, this is basically a stalking. This is a course of conduct part to the statute. This is also really difficult to get a protection order in Lancaster. But if you do have like a real stalking case with some significant threats in like what's being left or the messages that are being left text-wise or email-wise, we can sometimes get a protection order that way. But remember, again, you also have to have a relationship, so this is not a stranger. There's 2 options. I was told that you guys wanted to know how to get a PFA. So there are 2 options, our office or the bail administration office, which is on the 3rd floor of the clerk house. Bail administration, you have to be there pretty much by 8:30 in the morning, and you spend the whole entire day there. At our office, it usually takes you about an hour and a half. We let you leave because we just are nice people. We also have a playroom. We also are a little bit less casual. You also can't take your phone in the courthouse anymore. And so, again, that can be really, really, really scary for victims who have kids at school, or just, you know, again, if you've just been assaulted and you've just had a terrible experience, I freak out not having my phone, and I don't really have that. So again, it's just another one of those trauma things, I think, telling someone they can't have their phone for 4 hours after they've just experienced something is, I think, just insane. So you can come to our office, but we have limited advocates.
Why do you say that way, that in Lancaster County, it's order to bail?
Because judges have discretion. Judges have discretion. They get to decide how much weight they're going to give and how far they think it has to go. We're a very, very conservative community. We have a very conservative bench. It is interesting. It's also, right, well, and it's also interesting, and this is more about the law than you probably want to know, but one of the problems with family law and domestic violence and things that involve people's lives and their daily lives is people want their problems solved. And so if their problem doesn't get solved, they don't want to deal with us. So there's limited opportunities for us to have appeal these issues. You can't really do it because somebody says to me, well, I don't have an order, so forget it. I'm out of here. I'm going to go figure out something else. And so it's also dealing in people's lives with the legal system. It's really hard to change the rules and the laws. It's very difficult. We do have representation for everybody in the county that asks for a protection order now. So you get a lawyer. Our office represents people on Tuesdays in the mornings and the afternoons, and Midpen represents people on Wednesday afternoons, and there are no new listings on Wednesday mornings. So there are 2 full days of protection order hearings in Lancaster County every week. We file almost 1,000 requests for protection orders every year. We're like 5th, and that includes Pittsburgh, Philly, and we're like 5th on the list. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. It's a huge volume for the courts to deal with. Okay, so basically when you file a protection order, you're filing it what we call pro se. You don't get legal advice. If you go to bail administration, you're dealing with an administrative person who gives you paperwork and types it up for you and literally types up what you say. If you come to our office, you get to talk to a legal advocate who's not an attorney, but has had specialized domestic violence training and specialized training and protection orders. So what I'm saying to you about it needs to be pretty significant. An advocate will say to you, what else happened? The example I always give is, he kicked me. No, he kicked you with his steel-toed boots that had mud all over them from work, and it was freezing cold. You know what I mean? Like, that's a different story. That's a different context. And so I think that that's one of the fortunate things about filing through our office. The unfortunate part is we only have one advocate. And so she's busy. After you file your petition, you go to what's called a petition hearing at 3 o'clock. They hold them every single day. So up until about 3 years ago, and it's probably been longer, I always say that, and everybody in my office is like, it's been like 10 years, Christine. There was this case law that said that everybody had to come before the judge. So we used to just take them up the paper and the judge would sign them. So now you have to go before the judge, so the woman actually has to stand up and tell somebody. And the defendant is not there, the person that you're filing against, because it's called ex parte, so it's not litigated at that point. But you have to stand there and explain to the judge what you put in your petition and say that it's true. The most difficult, that's difficult unto itself. The most difficult part is you have to stay all day. And 3 o'clock is, as everybody in this room probably knows, lots of kids need to be picked up around 3 o'clock. And so it's quite cumbersome. And so it's not as easy as a process as it used to be. And what happens is you get a temporary order or you get what's called a scheduling order. And I want to be clear about this. So 80% of people get temporary orders. That part is, they're usually pretty cautionary. They want to make, take steps to make sure that nothing happens. But there's also something called a scheduling order. And what that means is the judge did not think that anything you said rose to the level of an emergency, and they're going to schedule you for a 10-day hearing. So that you have an opportunity to bring somebody in at that point if you want them to testify or something else. All the temporary orders that are granted are also scheduled for a 10-day hearing. So you get this order, you get your relief, and you have to be back in court in 10 days. At that 10-day listing, which is another thing that people are going to tell you, and you need to know this is not untrue, almost all of them get continued for 4 to 6 weeks for representation. Because as you can imagine, as an agency, trying to deal with 25 petitions and representation within 10 days is nearly impossible. So almost everyone in Lancaster County gets a listing, and then it gets moved to 4 to 6 weeks later. And during that period of time, free representation is available to all victims of domestic violence. You have to present your evidence and meet your burden, or come up with an agreement or some other kind of resolution to the petition.
And at the 10-day hearing, is the defendant present?
The 10-day hearing, the defendant is present. So he has an opportunity at that time to jump up and down and say anything he wants. But like I said, most of them are continued at that point. It's very difficult for defendants to get an attorney in 10 days too, but they have to be there. Everybody that files a petition, the defendant gets served by the sheriff. And so again, that's also another piece to this that can be very volatile, particularly if you do not get an order, where you're just getting an order that's temporary, that's a scheduling order. So you've just gone out to the courthouse, you've asked the court to protect you, the court said, no, I don't think so, and then the sheriff serves on your defendant something that says, I've asked everybody, they didn't believe me, and now we get to go to court. So filing it's a decision. It's something that needs to be thought out. It's something that needs to have some, kind of decisions made around it. It's not just a go get one. The police, children, youth, and anyone else that doesn't know what to do with the situation tells people to go get PFAs all the time. And so that's the other thing too. If you have someone that you really think that they want to file, they need to file, please call our office. First off, there's an advocate that answers the phone that can even walk you through that process, but we can usually get people in. And I think it's really, really important. There are consequences that can be very significant safety-wise, but also, I find that there is nothing worse than going to court and having a judge tell someone, I don't believe you, in front of the abuser, and I'm not going to grant you an order. I mean, that is so empowering. Yeah.
I'm here in court because you scared me to death and you succeeded in what you're trying to do. And then nothing happened.
Yeah.
That seems
Terrible? Yeah, it is terrible. And it's terrible to stand with, and it's terrible to watch, and it's terrible to get the phone call after the person that you knew was going to court to get the protection order that you know that they need, and it didn't happen. So yeah, it's hard. It's very hard. And it's also hard because, again, the statute reads like we should be able to get these. This is something that should happen. And I do believe that, you know, I still believe, as bad as the system is, that when we have cases, you know, that 10 to 20%, that's a pretty significant domestic violence situation. We get what you get it. Judges are very much like the general public. You know, you got a black eye, they give you a protection order. You know what I mean? Like it's very much that general. There's this small little percentage over here that falls into that category that everybody agrees that this is domestic violence. And then there's this. And that's the part that's probably the scariest, is because these are all behaviors, they're indicators of lethality. These are all behaviors that are indicators of increasing violence, significant violence. These are all the things that we know statistically are what put you at risk, but you can't do anything about it preemptively. And I can't tell you the number of women that have told me over the course of my 20 years, well, how about last week? What does he have to do to kill me first? And so, again, when you're working with women, that's what they think, that's what they feel, that's the scared that they are, because they often feel like the system is not being responsive. Yes? Yes. 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 And not the law.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, someone was denied because the judge said that the incident of domestic violence had happened more than 30 days ago. Not the law, not what's supposed to happen. There is a good chance that when you go back at your 10-day hearing, an attorney will be able to, or at your ultimate hearing, maybe even the 10 days, we can change things at that point, can document the significance of it, what the impairments were, and kind of get it to the point where it may get a different response from the court. Yeah, they don't understand why. It's almost like the why didn't you leave? Why didn't you file after the day after? Why didn't you file when this happened? Why did you wait so long? A lot of times people come to us because there was criminal prosecution, but then that all fizzled away and got probation or whatever, and now they're saying, oh, I want a protection order because when he gets out or when he does this, he's getting, and the courts are like, well, you should have done that before. That's another avenue too. If there are criminal charges, there's usually conditions of probation or release that say no contact with the victim. So there are other ways to kind of make that happen. Okay, so here's the relief that's available when you do get a protection order. Obviously, no contact. Eviction or exclusion, depending on what the circumstances were. Immediate, not immediate, 24, 48 hours, relinquishment of firearms. The problem with the firearms, not only just the 48 hours, which that was big in the news, I don't know, 6 months ago, 3 months ago. I have no concept of time. You can give your weapons to what's called a third-party safekeeper, which is basically your buddy or your mom. And so, again, they have to sign an affidavit, but it is a huge, huge, huge problem. We also, you don't have search authority. So if you come to the front door, if the sheriff comes to the front door and says, give me your guns, and he says, I don't have them, that's about it. Not to say that we can't sometimes help with that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, again, you need help. You don't, it's not automatic. You can get temporary custody, almost hardly ever granted in Lancaster County. Temporary support, not usually granted in Lancaster County either, but you can go to domestic relations, and normally domestic relations gets you in like 3 or 4 weeks. And so if you come through our office for representation, we can run some calculations and see if we can get you some temporary support in the meantime. And that is a remedy that we try to use because sometimes, I mean, you can imagine you just left, you have no way to pay next month's rent, and if there are children or you're married, you have rights to some kind of economic remedies. Reasonable expenses related to the abuse. The example I always use is the broken glasses. Somebody hit somebody, the glasses fall on the floor, they break. Broken cell phones. And now they're $1,000 iPhones. And so, yeah, when I started, every abuser that I ever encountered ripped the phone out of the wall because that was how you could get contact with the police or whatever. And now it's crushing the cell phone or throwing it out the car window or you know what I mean, like throwing it against the wall. So, yeah, who knows what'll be next, right? Any other relief that's necessary to prevent further abuse. So that's sometimes return of the car. So you've always used the minivan because you have the kids, and now all of a sudden he's taking the keys and won't give you the minivan back. And so we can often get use of a vehicle or something temporarily to kind of make that happen. Okay.
Christy, can you talk a little bit about the eviction part of that? Because with a lot of people working with housing.
Okay. So eviction means you actually were either on the lease or you have a legal right to be wherever you are. So most of you being housing people, you understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the lease, but if you created a relationship, you can be there. So what happens is, this is one of the major reasons that the PFA is good. It literally evicts the person from the residence, and they are not allowed to be there. Now, when you get to the part where you don't have to remove them from the lease, because they may still have a financial obligation. But when you're working with victims of domestic violence, and when we're working with victims of domestic violence, we would really like you to consider that and looking at evaluating the situation. Could this person independently be eligible for this rental or this lease or whatever? And we do work with people to try to get that so that it's in her name only, simply because, like I said, not a lot of people get final orders. And so if the eviction part's gone and you haven't done anything else, that person does have a right to come back. We do help people file what we call defiant trespass letters. Some of you might be familiar because that's a common thing to do in landlord kind of situations. And so we can do that if someone we know is off the lease. I also understand that landlord-tenant law-wise, if the person's been out and they were not on the lease, you kind of ended that landlord relationship too. So, back in the day when I worked for the Pet and I used to do landlord stuff, you can create a landlord-tenant relationship by paying and all those kind of factual things. But once you're out, you really aren't doing those things that would probably mean that you were a tenant anymore. And so then they're no longer allowed to be there just because they're not to be on the property from a leasing perspective. Exclusion just means you can't be there. So that's like, if you weren't living together, but he came over, for whatever reason, or to exchange the kids, and then you put something in place that says you are not allowed to be at this premise. So that's an exclusion because there's no landlord-tenant relationship to evict.
Can you address how individuals that have a Section 8 voucher that have filed a PFA, the families living together? How's that handled, or is there a law that protects?
There's probably somebody here that knows more about that than me. Okay, so the law, you can't evict someone for getting a protection order. So that's part of the start of it. You know what I mean? Like, so you can't say, okay, you're out because now you have a protection order and this other person's gone. Obviously, and like I said, you guys probably know more about this than me. My experience with Section 8 is that you then have to almost convert it to that person, right? Like you have to make it that person's Section 8. So they have to be eligible and they have to be able to go through, they have to be able to keep that Section 8 voucher. So they become their own household.
There are some rules around that. I'm sorry, I don't know. I work in the same office as the Housing Authority, but I know there are some more recent rules that have changed the way things are handled. I don't know what they are.
And to be honest with you, it's also kind of procedural. You know what I mean? Like what they decide how they handle it, and every housing authority is allowed to keep up as long as they abide by those bottom line rules. And so if you have that situation, I think contacting the Section 8 program manager first to see what they want to do. But yeah, that eviction is an eviction. It doesn't get trumped by the fact that you're on the Section 8 voucher together. So the person that's been evicted is evicted. I don't know that we know the answer to your question. Okay.
Jackie, I can find out and get back.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's connect you with people that know the answer to that question. Mid-Penn does a lot of work with Section 8, and housing, and landlord tenant stuff, so. Go ahead.
So, I think from, and I'll speak for myself, but as a provider to families that experience this doesn't make you feel good, right?
No.
This is not, I don't feel good about having the conversations with families to say, here, you can go do this because we know it's not a very efficient.
Okay, I don't want you to feel that you shouldn't do that, but I want people to be realistic about it. I think from our perspective, we find that a lot of people think it's the solution to a lot of problems, and it's not.
Right.
And so we gotta think of other avenues.
But I think so, and families that have experienced this or been in these situations, they talk to each other, they've all had these experiences, and they're like, don't bother, it makes it worse, it makes them angry, it does this, it does that. And so for us, that's hard. It's a hard conversation to have because you don't want to set your client up or your family that you're working with up for more trouble. And I feel like sometimes that's what it does, this process. I'm not pointing that towards you, obviously, but is there a recommendation of what we can say to them, or is there something that you would recommend, or even literally what verbiage you use to say, I understand that, and I totally hear you, but here's, I hate to use the word success rate, but what can we tell them to make them feel better about going?
A lot of people get temporary orders. Okay, so that initial filing where you get a 10-day hearing and then you get a subsequent hearing 4 to 6 weeks later, that is probably still at 80%. Okay? So that to me gives people time to figure it out. In that time, they meet with an attorney in our office. And that person can do that drill down to see what we really need to be doing. In that 4 to 6 weeks, I think our expectation, because we're dealing with the legal side of it, is that they really get serious about the housing issue. Because that's the rubber hitting the road. In 4 to 6 weeks, this person's going to be entitled to come back, or you're going to have to leave because they haven't paid their rent in 3 months anyway. And so that's where this is kind of why I'm here, because we're dealing with this part of it, and we're looking to the community to help us deal with this part of it. And I think my goal today is to make you realistic about what the system looks like, and to say, sure, there are the ones that you think are going to work and it's going to happen, and you're probably right. The ones that you're thinking, I'm not sure about this, you're probably got 4 to 6 weeks to figure it out. And that's why our work is so challenging, because we are the ER. I use that example all the time. We are the emergency room. We have to respond now. We can't wait. And so then you kind of move over to the social work department, who figures out where you're going on discharge.
Right. So for families that we do send over to you, and they have this idea that it's a piece of paper, it's just going to make them worse, it's going to make the abuse worse.
Right.
In the meantime, is there something we can say to them that says, and knowing what this is helpful, what the relief is, but is that, like, do you have those conversations, or are there things that we can say to them that's like just a little helpful?
You sitting with them and listening to them and believing them and trying to help them solve the problem is helpful. And we aren't any magic. And it's funny because I know this. Every time I do presentations, everybody wants me to tell them, how do I tell them the bad news? Like, give me words to say the bad news. I don't, we just tell them too. And so again, I think one of the philosophies in the work that we do with domestic violence is you meet your client where they are, right? So whatever you need right now is what I need to figure out.
and I'm sitting here, I may not be asking the question correctly, like
I don't think there's an answer to the question you're asking is the problem. That's what I feel like the problem is. You're telling them the right thing. It's just, right, it just sucks. When you deal, this is the analogy I often use. One of the reasons I can't do immigration work is for a certain percentage of clients who are here undocumented, it sucks. There's absolutely, positively nothing we can do. Nothing. They have to work under the table, they have to be afraid to call the police, they have to get health care in the ways that they can, and it sucks. And so, for a lot of our clients, we're doing the best we can, but there is really not a lot that we can do.
Do you provide assistance for the victim to possibly get out of their lease because they know they can't afford it moving forward from the battery?
Yes and no. We do have financial assistance for a limited number of clients to keep them in their properties or to move to new properties, but that is obviously a pot like the rest of you that gets diminished really quickly. There is not a lot of remedies to get out of your lease. I've thrown myself in front of several DJs and they just look at me like, so, she signed it, she's in it, she owes it. I know that Midpen does a lot more than their tenant stuff, and so if you have clients that's their primary issue that they're dealing with, but again, it's contractual. A lot of our clients are judgment proof. A lot of our clients have several judgments from several landlords. You know what I mean? Like that's not, I mean, getting out of the lease is somewhat nebulous. You all in this, if you've worked in social services, you've read a lease, you understand what the parameters are to get out of the lease, you understand month to month, you understand all of those things. But there's no magic. I think, you know, if you have issues where you think that the landlord is doing an inappropriate thing, again, that's primarily Midpen has, you know, a real section, a real focus on housing, and if you're a victim of domestic violence, it doesn't matter as long as you qualify for their services that help you. So I think the landlord-tenant stuff is primarily, again, so, okay, so let me just, I wasn't clear why I say this. How does anybody ever leave? I mean, that's why it's so incredible when we actually find women who have gotten out. And you talked about how people talk to people. People talk, you know, they hear that it's bad and this happens and that happens, and you know, the word on the street is what I call it. The women who have gotten out, they provide the best word on the street, right? They come up with creative ways to do it, and things, you know, we can help with a security deposit and a rental assistance. And then I had a woman the other day who, she's on probation, and so the Department of Corrections is going to pay her rent for 6 months, because if she doesn't have housing, she's going to go back in. And so again, I was like, wow, I haven't found that before. Like, right, so basically, jail's paying for, you know, it's kind of ironic, right? But she is actually living, she's the mother of my victim. You know what I mean? Like, and so she got the 6 months, you know, and so again, the way people make it work is amazing sometimes. And you hear that, and I won't hear that again for another 2 years. Okay, so the other thing we do at our office, what time is it? Oh, 5 minutes, okay. I'm sorry, I promise I'll give you 5 minutes. Back of your life some other time. Child support and spousal support. You can go to domestic relations. It's a pro se process to fill it out and file. You can come to our office if you're a victim of domestic violence, and we'll represent you at the conference level as well as at the appellate level. You may hear that we've told somebody to go to a conference by themselves or just participate by telephone. We only have so many people in our office, and because it is somewhat of a pro se process, if you're two W-2 employees, it's a calculation. You can actually run the calculation if you type in Pennsylvania child support. You can actually go through it, have somebody get an idea of what they might be eligible for. We do a lot of custody, and all the issues that were brought up earlier, all the frustrations that we see, We have no restriction for what custody cases we take other than the fact that you have to have been a victim of domestic violence. So that's a lot of our work. We do what I like to call economic preservation divorce. So we don't file a lot of divorces because as much as it is sometimes critical to recovery and kind of feeling better and getting yourself disconnected from this person, we usually primarily do divorces where there are assets and they can't obtain them, or we're worried that the defendant is going to get rid of them. So he's going to sell the cars, he's going to put the house on the market, whatever. So if you file a divorce, you can get relief to have the court not put something in place that says you can't do that. The other divorces that we file are, so back here, spousal support is what you're entitled to if you're married, but there's a defense to this. So I can say, I'm not paying you spousal support because you abandoned the marriage. I'm not paying spousal support because you were abusive to me. And you have to go into court and testify as to why you left. So you would have to give testimony about the abuse or whatever had happened. If you file a divorce with a claim for what's called alimony pendent lite, you just straight up get the support and you don't have to testify. And so we file a lot of divorces with an APL claim so that people don't have to go through it again. The courts are not happy to hear everybody's little fussing over what happened and why they all split up. They want to know why you didn't file a divorce. And so this often solves it. And so I file a lot of those. We also can file a divorce without fees. Which is a huge thing. It's like $300 to file a divorce, and like $50 for each claim or something. So, okay, so that's my contact information, and I don't have cards. So if you want to write it down, my email is on there. Email is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I know that there's a lot of things that are going to come up after today. Please feel free to contact me.
Any final questions for Christine? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the Section 8 question.
Yes.
I know we'll probably still have more questions, but I think just from my time in housing, the bigger concern would be for people who maybe they have a voucher and they have someone living with them who's not supposed to be living with them. They file a PFA and then fear of property management or the Section 8 office finding out about something. Have you experienced that? Is there protection for the normal consequences that would happen?
And again, rules around Section 8 and the VAWA special exceptions for housing, my experience is they don't fall into the category where you breach the lease by having someone else stay in your property. It's only if you and your partner, who's your abuser, are in the unit together doing what you're supposed to do, and then an incident of domestic violence happens and you don't want that person to be in part of the household anymore. So again, and I think that is probably more of what we see, is the abuser was not on the lease. The abuser was a person who was showing up. They probably may have already gotten in trouble once or twice about that person showing up because that person was loud or that person was causing a ruckus or they started fighting and moved it out to the street. You know what I mean? I think we probably see more of that second. So the relief that was granted in all of these great, wonderful statutes isn't going to really help some of our clients.
But will it protect the person who is on the lease from being
Yes.
evicted if
Not if they were there and they're not supposed to be. If they were a unit,
Yeah.
my understanding is that most of the rules are set up so that, yes, the victim in that situation will not be impacted negatively in her housing situation. And so whether that means that they have to recertify or they have to you know what I mean? I'm not sure about that process, but I know that the rules are set in place so that the person who's legitimately in their house with a legitimate other leaseholder and that person abuses them, that they should not see negative consequences. But that means that you were following all the rules.
So if the abuser was not a leaseholder but they were living there, that protection
Probably doesn't exist.
Okay.
Yes. Right, and that's what we normally see is that you get a normal protection order. I haven't done housing in a long, long, long time. I think you need to know more about what your housing authority does, because I think a lot of the housing authorities, if you get a PFA and it's supposed to prohibit them from being there, they'll probably give you that next chance. You know what I mean? Like, it's just when they've done this 100 times and the abuser keeps showing up and you keep letting them in, then yeah, so that's a problem, definitely. We can get the Section 8. Was there like a sign-in sheet with everybody's contact? You have contact? Yeah, because we can just, I'm sure that I'm absolutely positive that there's a handout about Section 8 and domestic violence.
Well, what I'm wondering is, we had talked about having another road home session on Section 8. The problem is that there are very few new Section 8 vouchers, like this many in a year. However, there are hundreds, over 1,000 people who do have them. So, raise of hands, how many people would be interested in a session on Section 8 and the rules and things like that? Okay, it might be deadly dull, but I think it might be helpful, so.
We can spice it up.
Real quick, so the PFA, like, just so I'm understanding, a PFA can be filed even if you don't live with the person, right?
Yeah.
So they can't create partners. There's no really, I guess for her question, like, there's no real way that they can prove that the person was living there, like.
No, but the incident occurred at the house.
Yeah.
And the address is in the newspaper. That's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, you're right. They're not, I mean, just because you filed a PFA, there's not an implication that you were living together. That's probably only, I don't know, maybe less than half of them, so.
Okay, I think we're gonna wrap it up in the sake of time. We have plenty of food. Please eat the food and enjoy it. We do have on the table some questions about this process, this program. We encourage you to write up anything, ideas for next subject. We talked about Section 8. Things you like, things that you don't like. We'd really like to hear what you have to say, so please feel free to write on that and just leave it on the table.
I also left on your tables, they're like fancy paper, because somewhere in my preparation I didn't get to do an evaluation, and I like to know what was good and what was bad. So on the front, if you can write one thing that you wish I had done or could be improved, and one thing on the back that you found helpful or were glad that we talked about, please do it. It's really like informal and helps me. And if you have questions that you want me to specifically contact you about, I'm going to eat lunch, and so you can do that then, or you can put it on the 3x5 card or just email me. That's kind of what I do. So please give me feedback, because that would be good. I can only do Lancaster County. There are other programs that I would contact the domestic violence program and ask them if they have a legal clinic. There are other counties that do. Do you work in New York? Yeah, if it gets filed in Lancaster County, we can do that.
Can we give Christine a round of applause, please?
Thank you.